Hello and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. A dramatic escalation in the Middle East. Turkey's defense ministry announced on Wednesday that a ballistic missile fired from Iran heading toward Turkish airspace had been shot down by NATO air defense in the eastern Mediterranean, bringing the confrontation dangerously close to the territory of a NATO member state for the first time since the current crisis began. Turkey, a NATO ally that shares a roughly 300-mile border with Iran. Such an incident represents a dangerous escalation, signaling that Tehran's retaliation against United States and Israeli strikes could increasingly involve neighboring countries. At the same time, tensions around the Strait of Hormuz continue to intensify. Shipping traffic through one of the world's most critical energy corridors has slowed sharply as security risks grow. Insurance costs surge and fears of further attacks spread across the global energy market. So, how sustainable is Ankara's balancing act? Can Turkey help prevent the confrontation from spiraling into a broader regional war, or are we witnessing the early stages of a much larger geopolitical shock? Joining me now is Bekir İlhan of the Turkey Research Foundation in Ankara, Luciano Zaccaro, Middle East and Iran political analyst connecting from Doha, Qatar, and Jason Isaacson, Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer, American Jewish Committee, joining me now from the United States of America. So, dear experts, welcome to Inside Politics. For years, Turkey has tried to maintain a careful balance, remaining a key NATO ally while also preserving channels with Iran and positioning itself as a regional mediator in the crisis from Ukraine to Gaza. But the interception of an Iranian missile heading toward Turkish airspace changed the context significantly. Bekir, my first question to you, does this incident risk pulling Turkey closer to the front line of the conflict, and at what point could Ankara's NATO obligations begin to outweigh its strategy of regional balancing?
Yeah, first of all, today's incidents, the missile that was coming from the Iran, was a risky behavior from the Iranian side. It was believed that the missile was headed to the Cyprus island, but the trajectory part of the missile, also involved the Turkish airspace. Of course, it didn't violate the Turkish airspace, but the Turkey, as per the Turkish Ministry of Defense, Turkey announced that the missile intercepted, and some parts of the interceptor fall in the Turkish territory. As I said, it was a risky behavior from the Iranian side, and so for now there is no reason to believe that the missile was against the Turkish territory, at least for now, I would say. But in the long run, I would say, as this war continues, of course, some calculations will also change from the Turkish side as well, because Turkey has also, clearly signaled that, it will not be the part of this war, and it will not, want it as a part of this war. And also Turkey, position itself as a mediator country that can talk to both sides. Turkey can talk to the Iranian side and also the American side as well. And also, just before the war, I would say Turkey tried to host the negotiations between Iran and the United States in Istanbul, but the destination changed, and Iran decided to move the meetings in Oman, but it was a different story for now. But for now, I would say yes, Turkey has pursued a balanced and a very cautious policy, toward the war. Of course, Turkey wants stability, and of course, Turkey does not want any kind of a regional war for now. But in international politics, there is always such kind of crisis. But for now, I would say Turkey's position is very clear, and Turkey clearly signals to all sides that it will not enter this war. But as you indicated that at some point, due to NATO obligations, Turkey's role in this conflict could also change. But I don't think that Iran in the long run, will, touch any kind of NATO territory or any kind of NATO ally, because it could be also a risky behavior for Iran. For now, I think Iran will keep attacking to the regional Gulf countries, but not NATO countries for now, I would say.
Well, absolutely. And as President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, made a statement, he mentioned that in case of any escalation and any attacks, there will be the proper response from Turkey. Jason, Turkey shares indeed a long border with Iran and has deep economic and security ties with its neighbors in the region. At the same time, NATO missile defense systems were the ones that intercepted the projectile. Does this moment mark the beginning of a deeper NATO military posture in the Eastern Mediterranean and around Turkey, or you think that Ankara still tried to keep the crisis at arm's length?
Well, clearly, Turkey does not want to be implicated in this war, but the fact that a missile that was headed toward Turkish airspace was struck down by NATO forces clearly implicates Turkey in some way. I believe, following up on what was just said by your correspondent or by the expert in Ankara, that Turkey wants to maintain strategic balance, wants to have the ability to stay out of the direct confrontation with Iran, a neighboring state with which it has a relationship and with which it has tried to play a mediating role. But I think it's very good news that responding to its NATO obligations, this missile was struck down. And what I'm hoping is that in the future, if Iran continues its reckless behavior and fires missiles toward NATO territory, that Turkey will continue to play the role that it must play as a member of NATO, and that Turkey will recognize that it's in its interests, the interest of its NATO partners, and in the interest of global peace and security, to do what it can to prevent its neighbor, Iran, from pursuing this reckless strategy of advancing its ballistic missile production, advancing its nuclear program, threatening peace and stability across the region. So I know that Turkey does not want to be drawn into this conflict, but as a country with a huge stake in stability of the entire Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East region, I believe that it must be clear to Turkish authorities that the reckless behavior of its neighbor Iran is not at all in Turkey's interest. And I hope that it will continue to find ways to support the efforts by, frankly, the United States in assuring stability in that region by making sure that the Iranian nuclear and missile programs are defanged. It must be the case that going forward, there will not be this aggressive posture by Iran that really threatens stability across the region with its proxy forces and its ballistic missiles.
Well, Luciano, Qatar's foreign ministry spokesman Majid Al-Ansari said at the press briefing on Tuesday that all the red lines have already been crossed. How serious is a concern right now that this conflict could spill over into a wider regional confrontation, and what options do Gulf countries realistically have to prevent that from happening?
Well, as it said, many of the red lines were already crossed. I mean, all the countries in the GCC were targeted, including Jordan, including, Cyprus. Not only military facilities belonging to the US, but civilian facilities, infrastructures. Even though it was not reached, the airport here in Doha has been targeted, the airports in Dubai and the airports in Kuwait. So I think it's that all the GCC states are in a very complicated, delicate situation, because on one hand, in January, they demanded Trump not to start this war if he was not able to guarantee that there would not be a retaliation from the Iranian side, and therefore the attack was delayed, and it was room for conversation that started in Geneva. Sadly, this was not the case with Netanyahu that pushed Trump to start the war, whatever, despite the fact that there were these conversations and despite the fact that anybody in the region wanted a new war. Now we have this war. The retaliation is happening. The United States was not able to prevent retaliation to take place. After 5 days, we keep receiving incoming missiles in all the GCC states, which means that even though the United States accumulated a big power in the region to supposedly eliminate the missile threat, they were not able to do it right now. So the military strategy of the US is not working. It is true that the Iranian strategy is not to win. It's a strategy to survive and a strategy to impose a heavy cost on those who attacked Iran and to push everybody else to convince Netanyahu and Trump that this war should stop. But we see that the ones that they are paying the price for this war between the three countries are the neighbors. Turkey so far has not been targeted, but as our colleague said, the government assumed that it was not directed to Turkey, but however they had to react to avoid any kind of damage inside the country. So what the GCC states can do now, what the only thing they can do is to keep defending their own territory, and they are making clear that any danger that is coming from the Iranian soil will be intercepted, will be neutralized. And now they are trying to neutralize it before reaching the territory. So the interceptions are being in the sea, not on land, to avoid debris falling into the cities and to avoid any kind of contact in land. They are saying that the patience is running out, but I still don't see that any of the GCC wants to start an offensive operation against Iran. They made clear that they never wanted this war. They made clear that their bases were not used or any of the resources or airspace were used against Iran, and they want to keep in this situation. The GCC doesn't want a war, doesn't want to continue a war, but however, at some point, I assume that depending on how long this war continues, they may need to do something. But I assume also that the pressure is exerted on the Trump camp as well.
Absolutely. I guess this is one of the key questions, how long this war will be lasted. But another very important element here, Bekir, the Strait of Hormuz, which carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil, and even the perception that this corridor is unsafe is already pushing up insurance costs and disrupting shipping. How will that affect Turkey both as a major energy importer and as a strategic transit hub between the Middle East, the Caspian region, and Europe, and overall what kind of consequences it may have for the global economy?
Yeah, for sure, there will be dire consequences for the global economy. But as for Turkey, I would say the oil prices are currently increasing in Turkey as well. Of course, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz creates a further instability, not just a geopolitical instability, but an economic instability right now. And as you said, that it's a very important energy corridor, And also, I think the closing the Hormuz Strait, I would say it's just a part of the Iranian strategy, the strategy of, producing cost as much as possible for now, because, as you know, that Iran is currently, attacking the Gulf countries, and it tries to, create a domestic pressure and an external pressure for the United States by conducting such drone attacks or such missile attacks. I would say Iran is trying to put pressure on President Donald Trump, and I would say so far it's working. I would say because there are maybe backdoor diplomatic contacts between Gulf countries and the United States, and also probably the Gulf countries demand that the United States that stop this war. And also, I think the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, I would say, added some another, pressures, and also it triggers a very important energy crisis around the world, I would say, because the entire world, not just the regional countries, the entire world, and also the majority of the countries are the American allies, I would say, they will be affected very badly for now. For example, Japan or any other countries, they are dependent on the oil flow from from the Gulf, I would say. But in the long term, I would say the Iranian strategy is to produce much more, cost and produce much more, bad consequences for the world, because I think to be very simple, I would say Iranian strategy is like that, if I'm falling down, I'm taking everybody with me. The Iranian strategy could be somewhere as well. But of course, it's kind of understandable because Iran is under attack. Israel attacked Iran, the United States attacked Iran, and Iran is right now is just trying to survive. It's just trying to retaliate against these attacks, I would say. But that's another point, I would say. But for now, I would say the instability or the uncertainty in the Strait of Hormuz will also badly affect the global economy. And as I said, it will also affect Turkey very badly because, as you said, that Turkey is energy importer, and the majority of the oil is coming from the Middle Eastern country for Turkey. And for now, I would say even the uncertainty creates some pressure on the Turkish economy as well, I would say.
Well, Jason, United States Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said on Wednesday that the Iranian regime are toast and they know it. I just quoted what he said. So, and at the same time, he was calling the results of Operation Epic Fury incredible and even historic, adding that America is winning. Yet, at the same time, we are seeing missiles flying across the region, pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, and now an incident involving a NATO ally. Does this rhetoric signal confidence in Washington, or does it risk further escalating an already volatile situation?
Well, thank you for raising all these issues and for quoting the Secretary of Defense. But frankly, let's face it, we're in the only the fifth day of war, with enormous military assets from the United States as well as from Israel, conducting airstrikes, having air superiority, air dominance over Iranian territory, taking out hundreds and hundreds of missile batteries and missile depots and other military facilities that the Iranians have. To suggest, as was said earlier in this broadcast, that the U.S. policy has failed is ridiculous. We're 5 days in. An enormous amount of destruction has been imposed on the Iranian military structure. Yes, they are capable of firing missiles. They're firing fewer missiles than they were. They produced an enormous quantity of ballistic missiles, medium and short range, and drones, of course. And they also sold their drones to the Russians to use in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So Iran has been a bad actor and has been arming itself to the teeth. A lot of its military structure has now been decimated by combination of U.S. and Israeli forces. They will continue to fire to the extent that they can. They're firing less. They will do less damage, but they will still try because, yes, they're in desperate throes of the last stages of this horrible regime. And I expect that they will do as much damage as they can, but they are not on the winning side of this. And it's time for them to recognize that and to behave like a normal country in the region instead of an aggressive country in the region that's trying to impose its will and undermine stability across the Middle East. So I think we should have this conversation in another week or two and sort of see where we are. But as Secretary Hegseth said, clearly this is not a winning hand that the Iranians hold. And they've put the situation themselves. They put themselves in this situation. This was not imposed on them. They could have long ago made a conclusive deal to end their nuclear military program, to scale back their missile development, which they did not need for defensive purposes, long-range ballistic missiles. And they chose not to do that because they wanted to continue to try to exert their will across the entire region and also, frankly, to break up the possibility of advancing Arab-Israeli peace, which their Gulf neighbors want to do. Iran has tried very hard to stop.
Luciano, indeed, Tehran has historically used pressure on maritime routes, as we already discussed before, and asymmetric responses as part of its strategic signaling. From where you are observing the situation in the Gulf today, does this latest escalation suggest Iran is deliberately widening the theater of pressure beyond Israel, or is it still calibrated signaling meant to avoid a full regional war?
I mean, I think, of course, now the situation is totally out of control because the desperation or I would say the desperation is higher, and it's true. I mean, Iran is not on the winning side at the military level, but pushing the whole world into a nightmare, including China, including India, including all Europe, that they are depending on gas and oil. I mean, the day that 3 days ago Qatar closed Qatar Energy, the price of the gas the liquefied gas, raised 70%. So this is a signal that what Iran is trying to make a point is attacking Iran may be at the end of the day ending with the end of the country, but we are not going to sink alone. The whole region will suffer that, and everybody should pay for that. And this, like it or not, this is happening. I mean, the prices of gas in Europe now will raise. China will be complicated now to keep their production because the Strait of Hormuz is almost closed, and there is no oil or gas going to China nor any other consumer country. Longer this is taking place, this war to stop, bigger will be the impact of the economic side of the war. It's true that no other country will engage in the war if not necessary, only in the defensive way. The United States and nobody else wants to engage in that, because many other countries also consider that this is a legitimate war, that there were conversations. There was a JCPOA that President Trump decided to leave because he considered that this was not preventing Iran to become a nuclear power. Actually, now Iran has much more, or before June, had much more developed in the nuclear field, and they were much closer to the nuclear bomb if they wanted to have it, because Trump decided to pull out from the JCPOA and not otherwise. Trump is the one that is to be judged for what we are suffering now. He is the one who pulled out from a deal that was working, that everybody accepted, that even the Israelis knew that the JCPOA was working.
But
Israelis killed
at this
many
stage, I'm sorry for interrupting, at this stage, is there still any realistic diplomatic channel left open, whether through regional actors like Qatar, Turkey, or has the crisis already moved beyond that point?
You're asking me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Qatar now is not interrupting conversations with Iran. I understand why. I mean, nobody wants to put in the situation that keep negotiating with a country that is bombing you. I am upset as well. I mean, I don't like to be in a country that is bombed by Iran. I don't see why they are doing that. I think it's a miscalculation from the Iranian side. I think Iran is burning all the bridges. Let's be clear about that. I don't think that this is the right strategy if you want to achieve a political objective. I think it would have been much better if Iran maybe close the Strait of Hormuz, try to target the American fleet without engaging on the United States. They would have made the point, and they would have still the support of many countries that they consider that this attack is because Netanyahu and Trump want to get rid of the Islamic Republic. This way, it's backfiring, and I think they are shooting on their own foot. But again, the way they made decisions has been, I wouldn't say erratic, nothing like that. It's strategic, but guided by some principles and values that I think they are wrong. The problem is the way in which Trump is thinking, that is totally erratic. In the same discourse, he said 3 different things on what he wants to do, and I think it's also wrong. I mean, the war, this is not achieving anything. It will not achieve the change of the regime, and so far, after 5 days, he did not achieve the elimination of the missile program. In June, he said that he obliterated everything, and he had to do it again, and he didn't obliterate it. There are still things there.
Well, let's see how the situation will be developed. But now, dear experts, unfortunately, we are running out of time. Thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you. Well, as tensions continue to rise across the Middle East, the question now is whether this confrontation will remain contained or expand into a broader regional crisis with global consequences. With missile interceptions near NATO territory, growing pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, and increasingly hardline rhetoric from all sides, the stakes are clearly rising. For now, the world is watching closely to see whether diplomacy can still find space or whether the region is moving toward a new and far more dangerous phase of conflict. Thank you to all our guests for their insights. This was Inside Politics. I'm Anastasia Lavrina, and I see you next time.